Yeah.
Good morning, Bob.
Hey, Gene.
Great having you here. Thank you for joining and taking the time out of your. I'm sure you got better things to do, and this is a long holiday weekend.
Yeah, July 4th.
Yeah,
Woo!
the Independence Day long weekend. So today's actually July 5th, right? For those
Yeah.
that might be wondering when are we doing this. So I'm glad and honored to have you joining me this morning. We're in the same coast, so at least we're in the same time zone, right? New York City,
Yeah.
me, and Philadelphia, you. Um, the goals are just to have a very informal, unscripted, as I call them, unscripted, candid chat about something that is probably on your mind and mine, as well as on as well as on minds of many other people, right? So um, I would like us to talk about one very well known and very, I guess, very popular and very successful in some way. We have to define that way.
Yeah.
Framework. But before I do that, I would like to give you the honors. Could you please do a quick self intro? Who you are, where you're from? I think we share some,
Yeah, sure.
great communities in common. But please.
Sure. Well, my name is Bob Schatz. I'm a certified Scrum trainer, and I've been in the industry for 36, 37 years now. Um, and got involved with Scrum and some of the agile practices before they were agile, before 2001. Mostly through a startup that I was in the mid 90s. So I worked at General Electric in the aerospace group for 12 years. And then I went into a startup working with uh, a problem in the pharmaceutical industry, trying to get drugs approved faster through the FDA. And we had a small group of people that came up with an idea of using PDF when it was pretty new, and browsers, and trying to do electronic publications. And that turned into a success. And part of its success was our ability to figure out how a small group of people was going to build an enterprise application in a heavy regulated industry in a very short period of time with no people, no money, and no time to do it. And at first it was just gut instinct, and then there were some of these patterns starting to emerge, like extreme programming, and Scrum had wasn't really out yet when I had started using these things. And there's a lot of people obviously coming out of big companies at that time, mid 90s, trying to figure out how to get things done quicker. Most of us, as I tell my classes all the time, we're using techniques that we just use during crisis situations and waterfall projects. So most people are familiar with being on a Tiger team or a SWAT team, or going into a war room, as we used to do. And we would apply very different techniques when we did that. The only unfortunate part was nobody would recognize that in a crisis, you find a better way. And so after the crisis was over, everybody would just return back to what caused the crisis in the first place. So I kind of picked up on that early in my career and thought it was kind of goofy. So when we had a chance to go into a startup, we kind of knew what to do. We weren't really interested in what we would call it, but it was just, trying to survive. And as I tell people, try to get enough money where you could actually eat protein, which would be good, instead of having noodles all the time. So that was my early introduction. I formally got involved with Scrum a long time ago, back in late 2002, when I was vice president at a company called Primavera Systems, which was one of the early Agile success stories. And we had a group of about 150 people. It was a enterprise product. It was a legacy system that was over 20 years old. And we had a pretty toxic environment. It was pretty bad. We had tried pretty much everything we could try. And the irony of it was Primavera, for those who don't know it, builds project management software. So we were the epitome of the Gantt chart. But we worked mostly with construction engineering firms, and but we were struggling with managing projects. And I had thought that these crazy practices we used in a startup really weren't appropriate for that situation. That was my own thinking. I think that would, for myself, that was one of my flaws. I was short-sighted. I should have picked up on the fact that our little startup that we use these practices wasn't a startup very long, and we expanded the company using these same practices. So it was just my own thinking that was blocking that. So after about a year there, I had gotten this book about Scrum. It was the first book that Ken and Mike Beadle wrote, and I just poured through it one night. It just like grabbed me, and it was really bringing together all the things I had seen kind of work. And um, the next day I came in, I talked to a few of my directors, and they were very, a little hesitant. They thought I'd lost my mind a little bit, and I said, I'm going to call this guy Ken Schwaber, who wrote this book. Like, I'm going to call him. And I just cold called Ken, and I talked to him, and he thought it was pretty funny. He goes, "Wait, isn't this Primavera? Like, you're the project management people." I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "We're struggling." And I said, "This thing that you put together seems pretty interesting, and I think I want to try it." But I said, it doesn't look like any of the cases that I've seen you speak about yet. So that's how we got started. So we started a project in 2003, early 2003, and we worked through and battled through it, and made a success out of it. We worked with Bob Martin. Uncle Bob is well known, and Bob taught us how to do test-driven development. And
Yeah.
we worked with Michael Feathers, who knew Bob, and Michael was looking at how to do automated testing and legacy systems. And we worked with him, and all the people that are the pundits of these practices started looking at this as like, wait, if these guys could do it with 150 people, this is pretty interesting. And so it became a little bit of a case study there. So that was pretty interesting, and that's how I became friends with Ken and Jeff Sutherland and Mike Cohn, and all the people that sort of got this early on. And for the past 15 years, I have been teaching, coaching, advising organizations all over the world, trying to figure out how to do this in a very practical, pragmatic way. I mean, that's one of the things I try to practice. Having done this in the beginning with a large group, based on what we're talking about today. We didn't have any resources available to us. There was nothing. It was Ken, who, everything we did was an experiment. And there were really no books out there. There was no YouTube because there's no YouTube, no videos to look at, no books to read. We had to figure it out on our own. And so we had like 15 or 20 teams working on a single product at first, and then we had 6 products that we eventually rolled it to. So we sort of had to learn how to scale it from the beginning. But I try to teach this and use it from a very practical perspective, and understand that organizations need to become learning organizations to try to pick this up. So while there's many designed in gaps in things like Scrum and Kanban, I mean, they're built with gaps to learn. That's where I like to see organizations try to pick it up on their own, and for the long haul, be able to pick these things up. So that's sort of my approach that I've always come at it from. And having the experience of the waterfall projects from my past, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand that. And so I pursued a master's degree, and I got a doctorate in management. My focus has always been on change leadership, and people that lead radical changes in organizations, why they choose to do those things, and how organizations typically respond to that, because everybody's looking for the magical change process, and unfortunately or fortunately, one does not exist. People have touted them, and books have been written about them, but they're really just they're feeding an appetite. And that's part of the issue that we have, is trying to keep it real is not the popular thing to do. Feeding magical solutions to everything, people have an appetite for that, and they like to consume it. Although sometimes it doesn't really turn into anything real. I mean, it takes hard work and a lot of pain to change anything in life, and this is no exception. So that's what I've spent my time doing, is trying to help organizations see the light, And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. It's a crapshoot. You never know what you're going to get.
I was on mute for a second. Thank you for that, Bob. So this is really informative, and I'm sure you've been around long enough to as you mentioned, I think you started using the word agile, started using doing agile before, or being agile, doing agile. People like using this as a figure of speech before it
Yeah,
was known
I
as
know.
agile, right? Before it got bastardized and brutally distorted in the industry, right? So these
Yeah,
days,
yeah.
pretty much the word agile means, you ask, depends who you ask, right?
Well, it's taken on. It went from something you try to something you buy, and that's the problem.
And speaking of, there are quite a few sellers though. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there is. I mean that's the I think that's the look. It's the upside and the downside that anything that works, right? If it works, um, it drives money, and things at some point are going to come down to money. And when
So,
something has the capability to put money in your pocket, and for individuals, I'm not immune to that myself. I mean, I didn't do it for the money, but to me it was more
you
of
make
a.
money. I mean, we make
I mean,
living
it's
in the
nice to
right
make
way.
money. I don't mind making money. It's nice to pay the mortgage and put the kids to school and all that stuff. I don't think that was the core of why I did it. Never really thought about it that way. I felt fortunate that it does that. Um, in fact, in my 15 years of running my own business, it's only been me. I've been pressured and asked why I don't hire more people and build an organization. I said, well, first of all, I've already done that, and I really didn't want to do it again. And second, I wasn't trying to build a company. I was trying to help companies operate in a better way so that they serve their customers better and create an environment where people are not getting sick, like physically and mentally sick over work. So it's been more of a mission than a business. That's been
Yeah.
my approach. I mean, it's not everybody's approach, but that's certainly been mine. Having been involved in it early, there was no money making opportunity. In fact, Ken has often stated that in the beginning, most of us, there was a handful of people who were trying to do this, and people literally thought we had lost our minds. I mean, they were. I've told people have told me like you're going to ruin the software industry. I mean, it was insane that just by trying something that you believe would work better than what we were doing before and not hurt people as much would be something that would ruin the software industry. But this when it takes hold and then it presents opportunities and then there's an appetite for it. You can obviously we could see the results of that today in that it spawned a whole business model.
Yeah. So let me kind of ask you a couple of questions if you don't mind. So I want to
Yeah,
have a few maybe tailored brain picking moments with you, and
yeah,
maybe we'll time box each other, and I'll primarily it's really for me to ask you some questions. I'll time box it
yeah,
maybe 2-3 minutes each, and if you want to turn it into like a give and take, I can also chime in a little bit. But
yeah,
specifically, what I would like us to talk about is, well, obviously, I think I heard you said before, and that we have validated this. You have some thoughts and sentiments about the, the business aspect of agility, right? And I don't want to be beating around the bushes and waffling around this. I'll cut right to the chase. We're in 2021, mid year, and it's been almost 20 years, give or take, since the word agile has been introduced before it has become the you know the uh, the household grotesquely abused term, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
we have gone through various phases of evolution there as us as the industry. In today's day and age, there is a huge vibe out there in the industry around scaling.
yeah,
Pretty much take any organization, small size, mid size, large size, they almost are intoxicated with their own need, with their own, it's a self-fulfilled prophecy, I think.
yeah,
We need to scale. So, and let me be more specific with my questioning. Out of all frameworks, or I'm not even sure, let's not even, to be totally agnostic, let's call it an offering, right? There's
Yeah.
an offering out there that has been around for some time, and it has an amazing industry penetration, an
Hmm.
amazing success. When
Yeah.
I say success, I mean specifically the degree of penetration, recognition. Um, it has become a household name,
Yeah.
right? And I think with that comes a huge element of financial success
Oh yeah.
for whoever and whatever stands behind this. So I'm referring to the scaled agile framework, and the acronym for it is SAFE,
Yeah.
SAFE. So an opening statement to you. What do you know about it? Some, I have some specific ones, but this is the generic question for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, I've read about it. I've looked at, the framework itself and tried to figure out what the magical thing that people are looking at. Um, with any of these frameworks, I don't think if I looked at them, piece by piece individually, is there anything wrong with them? I mean, there's criticisms of them. The criticisms can be that um, there's a lack of flexibility or agility that they instill. They sometimes come from more of a management driven perspective. Some would say safe, is, has a little bit of a command and control twist to it. It's got a little bit of that to it. Um, to your point, it has been very successful. I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons why. Like you said, there was a void that when these practices started being proven that they actually work, a lot of these bigger companies became very hungry for being able to use them, because they were suffering from the same thing that startups suffer. Is you don't really know in a very dynamic environment where things are going, and so you can't have these long range plans and then just execute it, right? You have to use a very much more empirical technique where you're letting things evolve over time. And most big companies they don't want to do that. I mean, I mean, although I shouldn't say the big companies, because you have companies that were born and raised in that environment, like an Amazon or Facebook or Google, who didn't grew up in the waterfall or didn't grow up in traditional project management, where they had to transform themselves. So it's more of a subcategory of big organizations that were running very heavy traditional project management, and their appetite for now having to do this. And I don't think it was, they were real into it. I think they reluctantly were dragged to it by the needs of their customers. And so, when they see something that is loose, they get nervous, right? I was in a lot of large companies in the early days, and trying to teach them to just let go and stop with all the nonsense that wasn't necessary to serve the customer. And some took that on and did well with it, and some were extremely uncomfortable. And certain industries were a little more, process oriented, and tried to cling on to that stuff as much as they could. So, when there were things that were being presented to them from a management perspective of, like, you can't let these software people run loose, you got to get control of this. And that's where it was sort of coming from. And some of the characters involved in that, some long stories that I'm not sure
Yeah, well, we're not going to be dropping too
but
many names. Yeah,
yeah, without dropping names, I mean, there's some of the people involved that I know where they're coming from. And
not the
so
agile world, not the agile world.
yeah, not really, there,
Yeah.
it wasn't a mission for them, it's something
Yeah.
else for them.
So let
And
me ask you this. I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask you like a
yeah, so
tailor.
I was just saying that they drove it from that perspective, and it was it's a success. I mean, who's going to argue with the fact that it's success? And if you feed the right people the right appetites in terms of who you feed it to, once you feed it to, one of the tigers, then all the tigers want the same thing, right? So it's like, well, if they're doing it, then we do it. And that's how things spread like that. So while there's some structural natures to these things, that's why I said before, the true agility has to come through learning and letting it breathe a little bit.
So speaking of, structural aspect of this, I mean, I'm sure you've seen I don't need to share my screen. I'm sure you've seen this
Yeah.
more than once. The graphic illustration of SAFe,
Yeah.
even if we go to the last version, 5.0, which I always wonder, I mean, how many more versions will you have until you get to something that's a little more
Yeah.
lean, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
almost like it's like with iPhone, right? Every version you sell, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
so you look at this thing, and you mentioned before, a lot of some command and control managerial aspect. True or false? I mean, at least in your view, these, as Marcon sometimes refer to them as lumbering, enterprises. When you have a lot of residual complexity, organizational overhead, and too much managerial
Yeah.
stuff going on, this
Yeah.
seems to be like home, right? This seems to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what it is. Like, somebody was asking me the other day in a class, they were asking me about SAFe and the, PI planning. And I said, well, look, if you're dealing with a highly dynamic problem, you can't lock in for a 3-month period, right? But if you're used to doing 5-year projects with no feedback, then a 3-month period is agile. Right? So like if you have, the thinking, the sort of advertising, I guess, of it is that, oh, well, you got to coordinate all these other people in the organization, and marketing has to know what, and sales has to know what they're doing. Which, I mean, again, I could look at a lot of companies that are very successful and they don't need to do a 3-month plan. So it's, again, it's feeding into, look, you want to be agile, but you also want to know exactly what's going to happen. So we can lock it down for 3 months and make it like, we're coordinating. And, look, I used to see a lot of people posting pictures of these PI planning events. And, I could always say like, wow, it's pretty cool. You get a lot of people into a room and do these big events. But I start to wonder, like, as having been an executive and, working with these things, it's like, I kept thinking to myself, I can't wait till these executives stop wanting to pay for these big events. They're renting out halls. It's expensive. You got to get coaches. You got all these things all over the walls, and I mean, it's pretty cool. But then, all right, after the event, with that, all that stuff's got to come down. And where does it go? And then all these people are going to go off for 3 months, and so if that costs $100,000 to put together, every quarter we're going to put together $100,000 event for employees is probably not happening. So I mean, that was part of the hype of getting it going. But these 3-month periods can be looked at as more agile than what they were doing before. And if they're in an environment where they don't believe or they don't want to know that the problem is changing more often, that customers actually need faster change, then it becomes, all right, we can deal with that. We're okay.
So let me ask. So you mentioned something about the cost of this, right? So and by the way, with PI planning, I'm yet to meet a person who has been through at PI planning and would say, oh yeah, the predominant headcount there were hands-on developers. Typically, there's anyone but.
Yeah, well, because it becomes it becomes an event. Right? It's an event, right? Any executive that's ever planned an event, you're pulling your employees off somewhere else. And these things, it's like I said, all the pictures that used to be, before the pandemic and all that stuff, were always like, big, like beautiful rooms, and they're all. I mean, it's quite a production, and it costs money to put that together. It costs money to run it, and you're pulling all your employees off. So if you think about it, I see companies all the time. They're in a turmoil because they're having all kinds of production support issues, and can't get it right. And the last thing they're going to do is pull their hands-on employees into a 3, 4, 5 day session that costs 100. They're all eating. They have to eat all day. Like it's a production. It's like putting on a conference. they're
But
expensive. And
here's what strikes me, Bob. Maybe you can have an idea. So I get it. If you at least get this like an open space kind of approach with a bunch of hands-on developers meeting regularly with users and customers and actually bringing Gemba close to where
yeah,
consumption is, that's one thing. But with PI planning, it's everyone their mother, with
yeah.
exception of the actual
The
value
customer.
delivery people, the people actually.
Right, exactly. That's right.
And speaking of economics, so this is, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a CPA, that's my disclaimer. In fact, I struggle doing sometimes my own books. I need someone to look over my shoulder. But I guess I am smart enough to know that economics of this are not very pleasing. So like you said, you run this relatively every 3 months. And by the way, when execs come in, they usually they like to pave the road. They would like to butter their bread in a way that they like to eat it. So, and then of course, anything that has to do with safe typically doesn't come by itself. It's almost like it's a horse and carriage. If there is safe, there is a huge monumental, monolithic implementation of some sort of a tooling strategy.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
usually say one hand washes another. You have
yeah.
20,000 licenses rolling into the house.
Yep.
Typically will come with this framework
Oh,
and vice
absolutely.
versa.
Yeah.
And typically
Yeah.
it's a large consultancy that brings it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how, look, having studied leadership and leadership training and leadership development and all, like, and we talk about these change, like having organizational change. You have to understand, like, you have to get back, as one of my friends always said, if you want to see a problem, just follow the money. Just follow the money. And it's a money thing. You got to like forget about all the, oh, we want to be, serve customer. I mean, there's a few of us that do that. I mean, I wake up every day like excited to do what I do, because that's what I'm trying to get done. I'm not worried about my revenues and and running a company. But for these big consultancies, for the tool vendors, for the training vendors, for the coaching, they provide coaching and coaching you on the tools and coaching you on the integration of the tools. And we're going to have a transformation program for your company. Transformation doesn't happen by programs. It's ugly. It's ugly. It's sickening. It's painful. That is the only way companies ever transform.
So let me ask you a question. I mean, now, yeah, I'm getting a little, a little emotional about this. Why would companies do that? So take any large organization, whether it's a pharmaceutical or an investment bank or an insurance company. Those execs, they must be smart enough. They talk to their P&L guys. They talk to accountants. They know that money is pouring into this thing. They look at these, year-end metrics or whatever they like using those, and they don't really see anything that's meaningful and tangible. Why do they have too much money? Why do they keep pouring money into these millions and millions of dollars into these large consultancies, tooling companies, and of course, safe seems to be the framework of choice. What are your thoughts?
I mean, well, my thoughts are twofold. One, you brought up, right? One hand washes the other, right? Money feeds money. It's always been that way. I've seen that for close to 40 years now. It's always about money. It's always about somebody, well, we can do that for you, or we could do this for you. And then it doesn't work. It's just money. It's, executive throwing money around. And my theory is it's somebody else's money. If this were you and I thinking about how we were spending our own money out of our bank account, we'd be a little more cautious. We'd be a little more like, should we be spending that money? And like, how much is it going to cost, right? So you'd be a little more concerned about spending your own money. When it's somebody else's money, it's psychology. You are not as responsible with other people's money.
So
the other,
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was gonna emotionally, you wouldn't do this to your company, would you?
No, when I spend anything, if I'm buying pens, I'm like, all right, which pen should I buy? Like, I'm not just like buy any pens because this pen's supposed to be the best pen. Like, it's my money. Like, I don't want to waste my money, right? So when it's your money, I saw that, look, when I was in startup, you don't have money. So you learn that you have to spend it very wisely. And one wrong move, buying the wrong pens just because you feel like you want to buy nice pens, is not a good move. And so you learn right? But I think the other point I want to make, which might be even more of the case, is I think it's about recruiting and retention, right? How are you going to recruit talent, right? Every company is in a war for talent. You need talent. All right, you find me software people, right, that want to work in a heavy command and control environment, right? Young talent coming out of these schools, they do not want, they want to work in a very different way, and they want to work agile, right? Whatever that means, right? It sounds better
Naturally.
than the
Yeah.
other thing. All right, so how are you going to recruit people unless you're on board with this? So it's almost like, well, we'll spend the money and do all this stuff and hang things up and whatever we have to do. And look, we might get lucky, and we might get better, right? I mean, even if we roll the dice on this, for, let's say, I don't know what people spend a year. I lost track, but let's say they spent $1 million in coaching, training, whatever. And so they spend $1 million. $1 million is nothing to a big, it's nothing. It's like, oh, I think we dropped a quarter in the street. It's nothing. So for $1 million investment to possibly, one, get the reputation for like, oh, we're like cutting edge here, so cutting edge companies, even when they're big, if they can portray that, then kids coming out of school that are looking for jobs, that the talent that they need is going to be attracted to that, right? And then for the people that are in it, who are easily can move around jobs now, and now after the pandemic even more, because of the remote nature of work, that people can get a job. I don't have to work for Google. I don't have to move. I can stay in my home, or I can go to a local office. Like, they figured it out. So there's more mobility. So now you have a mobile workforce, and you're in a war for talent. If you don't put yourself on the edge and competing, like if you're a bank and you can't compete with the likes of having somebody work in Amazon or Google, you're not going to get talent. And without talent, you're done. So that's part of the draw is, hey, if we can institute something and do it like turnkey, turnkey agility, then, the company will spend the money. And if somebody's there, that has to offer it, then they're going to be like, all right, it's an easy solution. Whereas if I come in there, I'm going to be disrupting the apple cart, right? I'm the guy, I'm going to be insulting people and throwing the whole system for a loop, because I know long-term this system will not work. So they could spend $1 million on whatever they want to spend on, it won't work. And when it doesn't work and you truly need the agility, you're going to have to get somebody in there that isn't going to, just tell you what you want to hear. You're going to need somebody that's going to tell you the truth. And then that's the end, right? It's just like anybody, if you had a health problem, if somebody says to you like, well, look, you can eat McDonald's, you're going to be fine, like it's not going to kill you. Well, eventually it will. And if somebody says, well, there's a diet here and you can eat that, isn't that sound better? Well, yeah. So it's like, again, it's a lot of psychology. I remember one time I actually did a talk on scaling agile practices in the Philadelphia area here. And my whole theme of it was diet. It's diets, right? All these things that are coming out are just the latest diet. Like, the thing is, you can eat special cookies and lose weight. There's probably some chemical in there that'll have an effect on your body, and maybe it'll burn, it'll raise your metabolism and burn calorie. But there's also something in that cookie that if you keep eating them the rest of your life, you're going to die. It's going to kill you. It's sure death. And so how do we know how to lose weight? It's physics. You ingest calories, you burn calories. If you burn more than you ingest, your body will burn what it doesn't need, right? And so it's pretty simple. But why is there an entire industry of diets? There's always diets, right? Because people in their heads, they want to change
without changing.
Yeah. So anything that
I have a cartoon on that. Yeah, you're not pragmatic enough. You asked me to stop smoking, stop eating.
Right. Get on a treadmill.
You really no.
You might have to sweat.
Can you give me something more practical, please?
Yeah. That doesn't fit my lifestyle.
Yeah, you're pragmatic, overly I'm sorry,
Right.
you're a dogmatic coach. You're not.
That's right. So you
So,
think about how much money is made in the diet industry, South Beach diet, this diet, Atkins, and this one, that one, and it's like it never ends because there's an ongoing psychology there. And it's the same psychology that drives what we see in this. It's an appetite for something that looks like normal, but it's going to make you agile. Woo!
yeah.
Like look at that.
Yeah, I have just because it was so consistent with what you were saying was so consistent with one of my personal cartoons. Let me just very briefly share this and then unshare it. It's an anecdote about the client, the patient coming to
Oh yeah, there it is.
obesity
Yeah.
clinic and asking for an advice, and once hearing that, hey, you actually need to change your lifestyle right
Yep.
off the bat. The
Yep.
doctor isn't pragmatic enough. He's too
Yep.
dogmatic. Anyway, so let me so speaking of, dogmatic versus pragmatic, I do a lot of embedded work with clients. I spend a lot of maybe 75 to 80% of my personal career, over 20 years, going doing this. I mean, mostly with large financial companies, insurance companies, pharmaceuticals. So I wonder what you think. So speaking of the large, complex frameworks, what do you think gives this, unique sense of safety and security to organizations? Like, you look at the organizational blueprint or the org structure
Yeah.
before and after they unpack and install safe,
Right.
and I don't really see, I see same exact people, same exact name. So it doesn't look like an organization is changing its structure. People are still aligned the same exact way. They have
Yeah.
some terminology relabeling. Well, it used to be called a beverage director.
Yeah.
Now it's
Yeah.
called a
Yeah.
casino instructor, casino manager, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
like in the casino movie with Robert
Yeah.
De Niro.
Yeah.
I always use it. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, is this something that is built into the framework, or is this something that organizations, it's like a natural knee-jerk reaction? We will.
Yeah. I don't like the thing with that I've always done is and I never wanted anytime people were taking this on to change their org structure. I always said, like, they always used to ask me, like, what do we do with the org chart? I'm like, leave it alone, because look, every time you guys touch that, it makes people anxious. Like, it bothers people. People start worrying about their jobs, and they worry, oh, like, what's my new response? So that, like, it throws the whole organization for a loop. And as you said, even before Agile, forget, like, go back in history. I mean, executives do that all the time. It adds zero benefit most of the time. Sometimes they get lucky, but most of the time, org changes, it's like you're moving the chairs around, and that's all it is. And if you actually looked at the performance of the organization, it never gets better. It goes down temporarily while people have to deal with it, and then it comes back to normal. But it I guess keeps everybody guessing. I really don't know. Even as executive, I used to try to avoid that. And I said, what we have to do is, on our day-to-day jobs, we may have to organize differently, like for instance, cross-functional teams. When I have cross-functional teams, I want people to know that your main thing every day is working with that team. In your team, you might have a silo that you're part of, quality assurance, or software development, or whatever, the engineering. That silo is there to develop skills and talent and tools and techniques in that discipline. So the silos are actually not a bad problem, because if they're done right. But the issue is when management of those silos starts tasking people to do jobs. That's when the trouble starts, because all that tasking is done with only the silo in mind. It doesn't take in that systems thinking. So if you're really going to tout systems thinking, then you have to see the whole thing as a system. And so you look at, well, I want to make sure, like, almost like your silo is a supply chain to the cross-functional team. That's the real product is the cross-functional team, and its ability to produce value. And so everybody should be supporting that. And that's sort of like that. It's almost like that Toyota model where you flip the organization upside down. And, the people close to the value are the people on the assembly line. They're the one delivering the car. So I think it's sort of like that. So I never really understood why you need, but again, why is it happen? Well, because people's careers are tied in there. Their career path, like nobody ever gave them, if you're going to take away their career path, then what do they do, right? It's always seems in the short term, well, you just do this. Well, all right, I'll be a scrum master. But where's my career path? Like, where did that go? And so if you don't give people that path and say, well, it's a new system and here's how you get better at it, they'll get nervous, right? So the tendency is, do we really want a fundamental shift in the organization? No, like you say, if you look at banks, insurance companies, pharmas, these are companies that are historically a little more, they are a little more conservative,
Rigid.
although
Rigid. Yeah.
they also have to innovate the most. Like that's the thing. They say they are conservative and rigid. They are very process oriented because of the regulatory nature of what they do. But they're also, what pharma company isn't innovative? They have to innovate. What financial institution has to innovate? The competition is so big now with digital that they have to innovate. They have to operate like a small company. It's painful to them. It's painful to have to operate with any kind of loose behavior when you have regulatory requirements, and that's where they get nervous, right? So the more comfortable spot is to have a little bit of agility, if we could say that, whatever that looks like to them. If it's every 3 months, then that's what it is, and good enough, I guess. And when we need more agility, we'll just go into crisis mode because we know how to do that, right? That's the one thing from the past that we all know how to do. If there's a problem and it emerges, then we will form a tiger team or a SWAT team or a war room, and we will go after it. And we've always done it that way. So it's not like we can't get it done. But if that becomes the norm, which is what was happening in a lot of waterfall projects, was that because the change was increasing, the norm became crisis. And so you can only sustain that for so long. And if you talk to, like you said, if you talk to people, a lot of, not everybody, of course, but if you talk to some segment of population in these organizations, they still talk about being overworked, working a lot of overtime. They have tremendous amount of tech debt. They have tremendous amount of production support issues. So what has really changed is they haven't really increased their quality. Their speed hasn't increased because of that, because they're basically being constantly, drugged back into rework of things that should have been working in the first place. And, when you go in there and teach them these core concepts of how to gain agility and speed and be able to change directions, they can't just do that in a big organizational level unless somebody spoon feeds it to them, as some of these things do. But if you want to, I always say, just like Lean always did, when people were implementing Lean, the people that would help them, if they were good, would say, look, you can't just have an organizational transformation. You need to establish pilot projects and start there. Start small and then learn and then expand. Then learn and then expand. Learn and expand, and just keep doing that. But that requires patience and it requires discipline. And these companies don't have that.
All right. Another question for you. So thank you for this, Bob. I guess, what drives me really, what draws me back into thinking is the, economics and practicality of this. So
Yes.
when I look at a large organization, let's take a large financial institution.
Yeah.
They have so much investment going into the heavy monolithic framework, and obviously when you look at SAFe, you see so many different layers. Pretty much every role that you have had in the past, it has some sort of presence on the sheet.
Yeah.
What's their appetite for actually? So if we take Agile for what it was meant to be back in 2001, right? The story goes, it was meant to be adaptive.
Yeah.
Adaptive is the more authentic word. Actually, I prefer using that word as opposed to Agile these days, because Agile has been more grossly misused.
It's like,
So if we think of this, what exactly makes them, do they become more adaptive by taking existing layers, existing roles, responsibilities that are most likely the same, and just mapping them to what, the titles and the
No,
roles?
no, I don't think they become more adaptive by following any pattern. I mean, you're not going to become more adaptive by adopting Scrum. You become more adaptive by learning what Scrum is teaching you. And that's where, like Peter Senge always talks about the learning organizations and systems thinking. You have to become a learning organization, and it's so rare that you have an organization that learns. You might have pockets in these big companies, but these big companies are like you said, they're monoliths. They basically have to keep sometimes tens of thousands of people in order. Like keep it in order so it doesn't generate chaos. And their biggest fear is generating chaos. But that's why they when like I said, when you have something that doesn't the criticism of things like Scrum is like, oh, it doesn't address all this, it doesn't address that, it doesn't. Yeah, it wasn't supposed to. That's the whole point. I also came out of the waterfall environment. We never had this. I worked in the waterfall projects for more than 12 years. I have never, was there a scaled waterfall? We never had certifications. We never, like, none of this. And we were working on massive systems. So I don't really know what the thing was, other than looking in history, is that startups in dot-com era were very successful, in spite of what the larger companies, they didn't want to look at that. They were just like, oh, these cowboy coders and stuff. It was always this thing. That's why I always said, I was in 2 startups that succeeded, and they were very disciplined. They weren't loose. They were very disciplined. Anytime we got loose, we got sloppy, and that was like putting the company at risk. So they weren't what people perceived them to be. And I think what happened was, because those companies succeeded, and then all that stuff opened up, that these big companies, they started feeling that their customers are, obviously, banks, insurance companies, they all had to go on the internet too. And they started saying, like, how are we going to do that? Like, you couldn't do that under their current way of doing things. That would have taken like 10 years to create an app for the internet. And they can't do that. It's like, it has to be done in months. And so there was obviously some appetite there for having to do something. Now, can they ever be like a startup? Probably no. I mean, no. Even the companies that started that way eventually established rigor. I'm sure Amazon today is not what Amazon was like before, when it was a young company. But also, look what it can do. So, companies change. They mature, or they don't mature, and they succeed or don't succeed. But this whole idea is like, this is going to be, it's going to save them. I don't think they buy into that, really. I mean, it's because companies have been around for a long time. They go through the ebbs and flows, and this is like even though we think it's a big thing in their, and how they do things, it's not to them. It's, from an executive perspective, it's not really that big. I mean, you will get some executives that are heavily bought into this and will support it. And again, it's rare. It's not the norm. Most of them, it's like, we're developing stuff, and I really don't care how it's done. As long as it gets done and nobody's breathing down my neck, and we're selling stuff or whatever we do, like, what do I care? It's apathetic. And we always talk about that they should care and they need the support and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, how many of them really do? And when they're presented with something, it's like, hey, we'll do this for you. It's turnkey. You just get your people trained and follow this. And, well, how much is it going to cost me? It costs you $1 million. All right, well, it's $1 million. I'm like, what do I care?
So let me ask you this question, Bob. So, going back to the topic of, I wanted to pick your brain on this a little further. I mean, you teach Scrum, you're one of certified LESS trainers, so I'm sure you've done a good share of teaching over years, and you've seen different students, different clients. So
Yeah.
Scrum, let's take it at its face value as it was meant to be, even though it has gone through some, minor modifications over years.
Yeah.
If you look at safe, and you look for Scrum, you will find it. You will find it somewhere very, at the very bottom. I sometimes hear people say, "Oh, Scrum is in the basement. Take a look at it." So I
Yeah,
mean, you got Scrum down below, and you got so many different layers. Pretty,
yeah,
like you said, traditional layers. It's almost like you rearranging deck seats in Titanic. You can call them whatever they want,
yeah,
but
yeah,
those are still deck seats, right? So what are your thoughts? I mean, like, let's say take your average student who comes from the organization that um, that has installed safe, and obviously that student didn't have a say, and you are trying to teach him Scrum with
yeah,
its customer centricity, product focus, um, you know product centric way of working,
yeah,
and they keep asking you these questions. Well, what about this? What about that? Your projects, portfolios,
yeah,
programs, RTEs, PIs,
yeah.
architects left, right, and center. How do you handle this?
I mean, I teach them what I did from the beginning. That's why I said, like, this whole idea that we needed to scale this up was never new. I don't know where people thought we were back in 2001 and 2002. Like, where does everybody think we, like, companies that were adopting this? Like, I had 150 people, and we formed 15, 20 teams. We expanded to 6 products. All right, so we couldn't just worry about a single team. I don't even know anybody that had a single Scrum team. I don't know anybody, honestly. In my 25 years, I've never heard of anybody having a single Scrum team. So I don't even know where that came from. But we had a bunch of them, and then we decided, like, well, some of these teams have to coordinate with each other because we're building an application together. And we started the Scrum of Scrums and had a Scrum meeting every day, a separate huddle where we just went across teams, and it was no big deal. And then and then we had what Ken and I called a mega scrums, and we were going across products. So we figured out on the execution side what we needed to do to coordinate people, and we just did that. I don't honestly. We never really thought about it. In fact, I'll tell you a little funny story about that. But and then on the product owner side, what do we had 10 product owners, and some of these product owners work in certain areas of the product. So we decided, you know what, to keep the product owners sort of synchronized, we should have like a lead or a chief product owner. That's where I came from. And then we had product owners for all the products, and they had to get together. So I always teach people, there's like just a very simple, if you just shut your mind down for a second and said, hey, I got a lot of people, I have to coordinate them, almost like a network, what would you do? Right. And then it just comes out. It was like a natural progression. And it was funny. I have to tell you this little story. Is a funny Ken story. So, we were working with Ken in the beginning. He was kind of coaching us on this craziness. And, we'd gotten along pretty good. Like, we probably went about, 6 months or so, which doesn't seem like a long time, but we really worked hard. And in 6 months, we were starting to really transform ourselves. So we had this thing running pretty well with these Scrum of Scrums and all this stuff. And Ken was like, the whole time he was trying to figure out like how to codify this, like some kind of model of how you would do this beyond a team. And because I'm guessing because I was sending him to other companies that I knew, and he was working with them too. And I guess this was coming up more and more, like, how do we do these bigger things? So he kept drawing this thing out. So he had this little sketch. He called it Scrum of Scrum. And it was like the first time that he had kind of sketched out a larger model that involved, marketing and sales and the executives and how to communicate. And he was just really modeling it off what we had done. And so he did this thing, and he made a bunch of copies. And he said to me, he goes, I want to get everybody, like, let's have an all hands meeting, because I want to get everybody together and I want to go over this. Like, he wanted to like sort of codify it. And because I would let him kind of, run with stuff in our organization, because he was really helping us change. Mostly he was beating us up pretty good, but we were changing. So I said, all right. So I called an all hands. I said, Ken wants to go over something with us. So we all get in this big room. It's like over 100 people. And he starts going over this thing, and everybody's just like, all right, like it wasn't like surprising. He was just kind of showing us what we were already doing. And he said, well, this is going to be a model that maybe Primavera can sell, like he was trying to like figure out a way to make it some kind of business thing anyway. So he ends the meeting and everybody's just walking out kind of confused. So I went with him. We go back to my office and he goes, how'd that go? I was like, I think it was just kind of confusing for people. I said, honestly, I don't know why you did that, because like, this is what we're doing. Do you really think that everybody would be doing that? I don't know for sure. And I said, you only have a handful of companies really taking a shot at this right now. Is like, are you basically saying that everybody should just follow this model? And he goes, I don't know. I said, I don't think that's a good idea. I said, we had to learn like how to do this. And I said, I would never tell anybody that's called me that, oh, this is exactly what you should do. I just, here's what we did. But this is part of our adaptation. And so he looked like real concerned and he goes, can you call everybody back? Like, we're going to have another all hands meeting. I was like, you want me to call everybody back in again? And he goes, yeah. Now, luckily we were all co-located, so it wasn't a big deal. But I got everybody back in the conference room and everybody's sitting in chairs. He goes, all right, everybody get up. And he told everybody, bring the copy of what he gave them, bring it back. So he brings everybody back in the room and he goes, everybody stand up. And he goes, I want you to take all the chairs and pile them in the middle of the room. So we built this giant pile of stackable chairs. And he goes, all right, that's the bonfire. He goes, now everybody throw that thing into the bonfire. So he made everybody take their sketch that he gave them and throw it in. He goes, we should never do that again. We should never try to codify this. And so you can kind of see where we started and here's where we are. So for me, this is, like I said, to me, it's just simple. You have a complex problem, you have a complex environment. The best weapon against complexity is simplicity. And it's just like, Jeff Sutherland always says, he goes, and a lot of people quote him, of course, but, if you can't run this with a small team, 1 or 2 teams, 3 teams, get that running and do it well. What exactly are you scaling? Right? What are you scaling? Like you don't even know how to do this, and then you're going to make it bigger. Like that's not going to do anything. So I like to your point, I try to teach people, look, this is simple. You're prioritizing work. You're getting a team or a bunch of teams probably to work on stuff. You work on it, you do it at high quality, and you get it in front of a user as quickly as you can in a sprint. Get some feedback, decide what you're going to do, and then keep doing that until somebody says you got a viable product. And then get it the heck out the door and into the hands of the customer. It ain't going to do us any good holding on to it. It only does good when it's in the hands of the customer and it starts generating value. And that's the core. And so if you want to pile a bunch of other stuff on top of that, and that helps you, I don't know how it helps you. I can't figure that out. But if you think it helps you and you have some, big giant poster to back that up, I mean, that's on you. That's a industry responsibility. And if it works, then I guess you're good. If it doesn't work, you're going to pay the price. You're going to pay the price by your customers. You're going to pay the price by losing talent. You're going to you pay the price by people walking out the door with their knowledge. That's how you're going to pay the price. So, what are you going to do with that? You can't change what's going on. It just, you got to ride it out.
So Bob, yeah, you're right. So many things may not be easy to change for at least for some time. I pretty think we probably could wrap this, now, give or take. We won't have done this for about an hour. Quick question to you before we call it a. By the way, I really appreciate your time and the insight that you've shared. I think it's pretty valuable. Last question for you from my end. I think we started off discussing the scaling saga that's out there. There's everyone their mother wants to scale, right? And whether or not they scale goodness or bluntly speaking crap, they don't really pay much attention to that. As long as they amplify what they have, as long as they put the checkbox somewhere in Excel.
Get that word out there. Got to get that agile word out there.
Yep. So Mike, what are your thoughts about descaling? Like as a concept, there's a concept of descaling. In order to scale goodness, you need to descale waste and complexity. Just in a couple of words, if you can give some thoughts on that. Even if you use the term, even if you don't, if you have any association or sentiments about the idea of flattening, simplifying, reducing complexity, removing waste and overhead before creating an opportunity for scaling
Yeah.
goodness. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's the same thing if you were adopting this for the first time, or you're trying to sort of rework what you've already done. In other words, if you've already bought into that system and you haven't seen the results, and then you're trying to get out of it, as you know, I've had quite a few executives like, Bob, you got to get us out of this. I spent all this money and we got nothing. Get us out of this. And so, I mean, there's some basic things like, well, first of all, get all the propaganda off the walls. That's the number one thing. Get everything off the walls, because this isn't stuff you hang on the wall. And so get it off the wall. And then we got to do the same thing we would do in a original transformation, is we got to reestablish through pilots how to get the basics right, and then see how you do with the basics without all the other stuff involved, and just use, like you said, the simplest version of what we need to do a pilot, and prove to yourselves that you can do this without all the nonsense. And once you prove that, then you can start to expand it piece by piece and grow it. So it's almost like we have to reroot it. The same way we plant the seeds on an original transformation, you got to reroot it and get the the visual evidence of what's causing the problem out of the way.
Good. Yeah, that was my
You know,
that's what I was suspecting you would say. So
I mean,
thank you for
again, it's learning. It's like, how do you get people to learn? You got to get back to the
well,
basics. It's the same
yeah.
thing if you were teaching math, or you were teaching, a sport, or you're teaching music, or anything else. We got, I don't know where you've been, but obviously it hasn't paid off for you. Let's get back to the basics.
Yep.
Right.
I'm also a big
Same
fan
with
of
dieting, right? I don't know
yeah.
what diet you've been on, but it ain't working. Let's get back to the basics. You're gonna have to exercise and eat less. That's the,
Yep.
stop eating McDonald's.
Well,
Nothing against McDonald's.
well, listen, that's not pragmatic. That's too dogmatic. What do you mean? Do not
Right.
eat McDonald's? You mean I actually need to start sweating more that I'm eating?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it ain't.
It's
You're
the
not.
hard work.
You're not pragmatic enough. I'm being facetious because yes, I hear this a lot. This is not pragmatic.
Right.
This is too.
Hey,
This is too purist. This is purist. This is too.
Yeah.
This is theoretical. We need a more
Since,
practical because we're special.
yeah. Hey, since we're, this is July 4th, July 5th now.
Yeah.
And, you have to look at it. It's like, how did these guys get started?
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
ugly. That was ugly. That was not pretty. This isn't like, oh, we got a great idea and we're going to form a country. Like, it's not that pretty.
That's right.
It was
We
ugly.
have this huge framework.
Yeah, real ugly, just to get the framework. And then it's been, 245 years of testing the framework. And this past couple of years has been tested quite a bit. And so, through all those years, it's constantly, people trying to overdo it, underdo it, redo it. And it's a battle, right? But to have something like that, you have to be constantly learning. So just to throw some Independence Day theme stuff in there.
Well, you're right. So Bob, I'm going to thank you, kindly for, coming out on this after July 4th day, probably, spending some of your valuable time doing this with me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Gene.
Thank you. I will thank whoever's going to be watching this. Hopefully they will be able to fish out some goodness and usefulness from our exchange. I'm going to stop recording now, so I'm going to say you formally an official thank you.
Thank you, Gene.
And hopefully we can get some goodness out there and serve the industry and so
that
serve the
nice.
People as opposed
Ring the bell, folks. Ring the bell.
Yeah, instead of abusing and yeah, and turning this into a into a transactional business. So let me put a stop to that. All right.
That will be